Yeah, and another X factor before we move on is for being a long, spindly guy with not a lot of body fat, Dong Kim has awful cardio.
Yes, he does. Yeah.
And Condit is the guy who punches and bunches, and he's been in a lot of wars. If you get in a situation where Condit's been flat on his back for 2 rounds, he could come out like a house of fire and really put it on Kim, who will be tiring and worn down. So, I mean, that's definitely something in the favor of Condit, too.
Yeah, and that actually harkens back to Condit's fight. I think it was against, what was it, Hiromitsu Miura?
Oh, yeah, Miura, too, yeah.
Yeah, Miura, and that was actually, yeah, you talked about McDonald, too. That's another good one where he came back and got a last second to you. But, yeah, he does have a tendency to do that. He'll be in a tough fight where it looks like he might get outworked, and he just finds a way to win. That's just what he's good at. So, this fight is much easier to call. Ryan Bader, Tito Ortiz. I'm taking Bader, and I'm not even thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to write about Tito Ortiz and like the phenomenon of him, because he really is something that's unique to MMA. Well, not unique to MMA, but I think it shows how MMA is different than other sports. When we were talking about, I guess we never talked about it, but in the NBA Finals, everyone was talking about how great LeBron was and how he's the best player in the league. But ultimately, he had to go out on the court and play, and he played like crap and showed that he wasn't the best player in the league. Well, Tito Ortiz has been talking a big game like he's the best guy in the world for years, and he has not been the best person in the world for a really long time.
Right.
And it's the amazing power of someone like Tito or someone like Jason Mayhem Miller who just talks about themselves and how people believe that. I mean, I have people that I haven't talked to in years talking to me about Tito getting back in the title situation, and I'm just like, what are you talking about?
Right. Yeah, and we see the same thing happen in boxing. This is one place where those sports are obviously pretty similar, is the promotional aspect, and that is a big part of it. And Tito is, as far as, part of it was the UFC. He was kind of one of their poster childs back in the dark days and moving into really the very first time they started to break into the mainstream, which might have been his fight with Ken Shamrock. And really, how much does Ken Shamrock have to do with his big name? I mean, even with his rematch against Shamrock, I think it was UFC 61. Or I'm sorry, wait, was it? Yeah, it was 61. And I think everyone, like you and me, anyone who had followed the sport at all, knew that Ortiz was going to beat the crap out of him. Shamrock was too old, and he was from a completely different era. But it was one of those times I was at someone else's house, and there were a lot of new fans who were just like, "Oh, hey, Ken Shamrock's going to win this fight," and that's and also, if you remember, as I'm sure you remember, also the last fight that they had was one of, if not the highest rated TV fights in MMA history. So, I mean, just beating Ken Shamrock 3 times, as easy as it might have been the last 2 times, that's really what's made Tito Ortiz's career.
Yeah, I mean, the real question is, would a prime Tito have won a fight against someone like Ryan Bader? Mm-hmm. I mean, now it's not even really a question. I think that I wouldn't be shocked if Tito got a takedown in the first, but since when he's not fighting someone named Ken Shamrock, he is done after the first round, and he has nothing on the feet. So he just walks around like a zombie and gets beat up by guys.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, he got thoroughly outstruck by Matt Hamill.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Well,
I think this is the end for old Tito.
Yeah, and plus he does have the advantage of, I think he fought 2 guys in Horace Griffin. One was a close win early on, the first time they fought, and also the draw against Rashad Evans. Both those guys went on to actually win the title at one point, and I think it was just really good timing for him fighting those guys when he did. I think if those guys were a little more confident, especially in Rashad's case, in their abilities and a little more experience, I think they would have beaten Tito. They were just kind of new to the really big stage and maybe had a little bit of stage fright, and that's really what helped out Tito in those instances. But, yeah, to give Bader some credit, though, I think he's a good wrestler. He's really improved that heavy right hand of his, and so I think he'll get this win. But it's also always good to remember that once a guy who specializes in the double leg like Tito has back surgery, it's hard to see them having a really, really productive career after that.
Very true, very true.
Right, all right. So on to one of the 2 main fights. Actually, this will be a really good one, I think. 2 guys who... It's not going to be boring, and I don't think it'll last long, but Wanderlei Silva against Chris Lieben. I've actually got a bet with a friend of mine. I'm taking Silva because I think Lieben's punch-drunk, stumbling, crazy, wild style is actually going to play into Silva's hands. I think Silva, even though he's really wild and reckless, has a little bit more hand speed, and Lieben is heavy-handed, but he's not an accurate enough puncher to catch Silva before I think Silva can catch Lieben.
Yeah, I mean, I have not really been impressed with Lieben in a long time. He had a little comeback stretch where he put up a couple good fights in a row. I think up until the end, I thought he was losing to Akiyama. I think that Silva should be able to win this fight. I mean, if he leg kicks at all, he's on the way to victory.
Mm-hmm.
The wild card, though, is if Lieben comes out and looks to wrestle and looks to work in the clinch, he could really put himself in position for a victory.
Right.
I don't think he's going to do that because he's built up this whole aura of being like this, non-stop zombie locomotive guy coming forward. And I think that Silva's just going to eat him up from the outside the way that Brian Stan did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, we've seen guys at times, and I mean, even though I got lucky and saw it coming, but like the Anthony Johnson-Dan Hardy fight, everyone's like, oh, hey, a stand-up war, and then what does Anthony Johnson do? He, after some early success, he shoots in for the takedown because he's smart. He's like, this guy can't wrestle, I'm going to take him down. Lieben is one of, if not the only guy that I know, no matter how much it might benefit him, I don't see him wanting to go for the takedown because that's just not, it's just not in his, I don't know, it's not something that mentally he'd be willing to do.
Yeah, I mean, he did it against Jay Silva when they fought, but I think Jay Silva might have just fallen down from a gust of wind and Lieben ended up on top of them.
Right.
Because he has no takedown defense, so, yeah.
And also, one quick thing to ask you about, I was wondering, I've always had this theory that you have a guy like Lieben who, regardless of what anyone can say about him, he's just got a granite chin. He's, there are times you see him stumbling around, you think he's knocked out, and then he comes back and wins. And what can happen with a guy like that is once that egg finally gets cracked, suddenly it gets a little easier and a little easier to knock them out every time. We kind of saw it with a guy like Fujita back in Pride. Do you think it's possible that now that Lieben has been stopped like he was against Brian Stan, that it's going to be a little bit more doable for guys like Wanderlei Silva or even guys maybe a little bit lower down the food chain who have heavy hands to actually stop him?
I think that's a real distinct possibility. He did get completely stomped by Anderson Silva, and he still held onto his chin. So, I don't know. He has taken some serious beatings and been cracked by a lot of, powerful guys. And interesting that you bring that up is also that I would say the same thing has happened to Vanderlei.
Yeah, that's true.
He was always a guy who was a strong chin guy, and, that punch that Rampage put him out with, I mean,
yeah,
that was brutal. So,
yep.
I mean, clearly Lieben does have the ability to win this fight by knockout. I don't see it happening, but I would not be shocked if they got into some sort of a brawl situation and Vanderlei was laying face down or something like that.
That's actually a valid point, too. I mean, I give Silva maybe too much credit just because I remember him going toe-to-toe with Liddell and not getting knocked out. And unlike Chuck, he hasn't had that string of just knockout after knockout. But other than, after that, other than the Rampage fight, I mean, he fought Rich Franklin, who, good fighter, but I mean, I don't care what people say after the Liddell fight. Franklin's not a knockout puncher, really. So, that's something to watch out for too. I mean, which guy's just had a little bit too much wear on that chin. But I'm taking Silva, but it's going to be a good fight either way. So, lastly, on to the main event. It's actually just as intriguing. Dominic Cruz is really kind of getting into that whole champion who doesn't look like they can lose kind of area. I mean, he's only defended his title a few times, but I've really been impressed with his crazy, if manic and a bit absurd footwork at times. He just makes it work for him, and he's hard to hit. He punches at crazy angles. He, sneaks in some takedowns. I really like how he fights. I think if he doesn't let Uriah Faber get in his head and he goes out and does his game plan and just doesn't even think about that first fight, I think he has a better chance of winning. But do you think Faber might have a mental edge on him since they've fought before and won, or do you think Cruz is a different guy now?
I hate to be like a hater of sorts, but I've never been impressed with Dominic Cruz. Like, I know that sounds like I'm just being negative and all this stuff, but he comes out and he's spastic, and he throws basically ineffective punches. He's like tailing guys. He's not putting any power on him. He's not doing any damage. Really, if you watch the fight, he wins them with his wrestling. And the reason why he wins them with his wrestling is because his biggest wins
Yeah.
And he's able to get his long arms on people and out-wrestle them with upper body type stuff.
Yep.
Faber is bigger than both Jorgensen and Benavidez.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if Cruz is not able to wrestle and out-wrestle Faber the way he is these other guys, I don't think his spastic moving around is really going to make a difference. I mean, without takedowns in the Benavidez fight, the second one, I think he loses that fight because I think Benavidez is doing a lot better on the feet than people realize.
Yep.
I mean, the judges' cards were not like a blowout like the way people look back on it.
I'm actually glad you brought up the Benavidez fight because I remember after that fight happened, I think it was, well, Miguel Torres and Ariel Helwani were both talking about how they thought the judges' scorecards were out of whack and that Cruz basically won all those rounds or 4 out of the 5. And I'm with you that Benavidez, I think, really made a lot of good adjustments in their rematch. And as far as boxing, you're right. I think he was having a lot of success on the feet, and Cruz's takedowns really broke up that momentum. So that's something to think about. Obviously, Benavidez being Faber's teammate, I'm sure he's going to be well prepared for what Dominic has to bring into this fight. But one thing that I kind of stands out to me is that you mentioned first of all Dominic being taller than all those guys. He's taller than Faber too, so I think that's something to think about. And it was interesting to see Faber have as tough a time as he did against Eddie Wineland, who probably isn't as good a wrestler, though maybe a bit more crisp striker. But Faber had a lot of trouble getting him down early in that fight, and that fight was really competitive for a while. Do you see Faber being able to get Cruz down? Because I think part of the problem is I'm not sure that Cruz is going to let Faber get him on the mat.
No, I completely agree. When Faber first moved down to bantamweight, I was like, well, he's going to move down to bantamweight, he's going to win a fight, and then he's going to beat Cruz. The Wineland fight really kind of stopped my momentum on that because his wrestling didn't look sharp. Wineland is a guy who's shown like zero wrestling in the past.
Right.
He's almost like Donald Cerrone level at the time.
Yep.
And he was pretty strong against Faber. Faber had a lot of trouble getting to the ground. With that being said, I think that Faber's scrambling ability is going to be the story in the Cruz fight. I think he's going to be able to submit Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if they get into a situation, he's going to be able to take them back or get a guillotine choke, and I think that's going to be the story. Because I think Cruz is going to do his thing on the feet, go for takedowns late in the round, and I think Faber's going to have enough to be able to, pull something out there.
Yeah, I'm actually leaning the other way. I actually think Cruz is going to be smart enough to stay out of those scrambling situations because that's where Faber is at his best. But it is a good fight, and you brought up a lot of good points. Though I will say your hater speech of Dominic Cruz, since we haven't had a show in a couple weeks, did sound eerily similar to your hater speech of one Junior Dos Santos, and I think we know how his fight with Shane Carwin turned out.
I was going to say this. Like, whenever I have strong feelings against the guy, it usually does great things for him.
Right.
Like, when I've been hating on Junior Dos Santos forever, and, you can completely shut me up with his performance against Shane Carwin.
Yeah.
And if Cruz goes out there and he wins, 50-45 against Uriah Faber, I'm going to have to eat a lot of crow. But, I wouldn't be talking all this smack if I thought I was going to eat crow. So there you go.
Yeah, and I know it's the other topic, but what did you think of Junior Dos Santos right at the end of that fight taking Shane Carwin down? That had to be the ultimate slap in the face, you should probably retire kind of moment. I'm sure Carwin had to feel horrible at that moment.
Yeah, I think I could have taken down Carwin at that moment.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
He was beaten in more ways than one.
He was, but you had to admit it was a pretty good athletic looking shot. You're right, Carwin was tired, but hey, you gotta give a Brazilian credit when they show some wrestling acumen.
Oh yeah, Mark Munoz is a wrestling coach. He's a very, very technical wrestler, very smart guy. He's wrestled for John Smith at Oklahoma State, so.
Right. Well, we got a few more seconds, real quick. Other than the main card, what do you think is going to be the best fight of the night? Real quick, I'm going to say Anthony and Joe Kwani because he's going to knock out Andre Winner, but what's your pick?
Brian Bowles and Kei Mizugaki because those are 2 top 10 guys on a Facebook card, so that's exciting.
Good point. All right, well, that should wrap it up for this episode of the MMA Outsider Podcast. As always, you can check us out at ProMMANow.com where we post the show, on YouTube where we also have the show up there, and on Twitter.com/MMA Outsider Podcast and MMA Outsider Podcast at gmail.com. Did I get the intro right?
You did, the outro.
The outro, whatever. Yeah, okay. See, I fucked up. Great. And that's why you're going to be back in charge of the show soon.